Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, I'm Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. In the late 1970s, when you asked for coffee to go, that's takeaway coffee, you got your coffee and then you had the plastic lid and you had to punch a hole or tear a hole into that plastic lid just to drink the coffee. As you'd expect, that was tricky and sometimes you spilled hot coffee on yourself. And that changed when a couple of food engineers, William and Kenneth Dart, came along. They looked at the lid and they made one little modification. They put a press-down tab and it seemed like a valve. They even gave it a name. They called it the lip-engaging buttress. And if you wanted to sip your coffee, you merely had to push on it with your upper lip. And if you stopped drinking the coffee, the tab would snap back in place and prevent any spill. The invention wasn't a complete re-engineering of the cup. Instead, it was a very small tweak. Similarly, you too can make 3 minor tweaks and significantly improve your About Us page. The 3 points that we're going to cover today are the orientation of your photo. The second is your story a memoir or a history book? And the third is how to write the page so that clients read between the lines. Let's start with the first one, which is the orientation of your photo. I was on holiday in Vietnam when I went for a photo shoot. It was a remote fishing village about an hour away from where we were in central Vietnam. And one of the first instructions I got was, don't shoot portrait, shoot landscape. If you look at a lot of photos on the About Us page, all you're likely to see is a sort of mugshot. It's usually the kind of picture that you find on a passport or a driving license. It might have been shot by a professional photographer. It might have had perfect lighting conditions. But there is a problem with that portrait shot. A portrait is often tightly cropped and has no context. That message of context is precisely what the instructor was emphatic about. When I was snapping pictures of the fishermen in their unique fishing baskets, it was almost too easy to zoom into their faces, thus removing all of the surrounding context. The context included that they were on the water, that it was a stormy morning, and that they were surrounded by fishing boats. Without all of that additional information, the picture has little or no context. It has very little story. Our About Us pages can also suffer from this lack of context. When we first started Psychotactics, our About Us page had a slightly zany picture of me standing on one leg and kind of flapping my hands. It was an interesting picture, but like many pictures, it was taken in a studio. It was in a portrait mode and with little or no context of the surroundings. When we launched our new website in 2018, we made sure that the imagery had meaning. If you go to the About Us page today, you'll see a completely different image. It's one of me standing in between 2 cartoon characters, Mike and Sully, from the movie Monsters, Inc. It's not a studio image and was shot with a phone camera, but it has a landscape orientation and therefore lots of context. In a matter of seconds, it gives you an impression of the person and a semblance of the things that they're interested in. Now, you probably still have that picture on your website, and it's not like you have to ditch it right now. You may still want to hold on to it, even though it's tightly cropped. However, do put in some images that show you on a trip somewhere. Maybe you're into wood carving or maybe into pottery. How about having a picture with a chisel or sitting at a pottery wheel? The change that you're making is a very tiny one. It's similar to the tab on the takeaway coffee. That lid didn't involve a mammoth re-engineering sort of drama. Instead, it was a slight tweak. And you too could dig into your photos and you could find pictures that give your audience that feeling, that quick snapshot of who you are. And ideally make it a landscape so that you can get it in the context. This takes us to the second tiny fix, which is your About Us page. Is it a memoir or a bit like a history book? I have a book that I intend to read in December. It's called The Silk Roads by Peter Frankopan. And in the book, Frankopan talks about the rise of the Western civilization and how it didn't stem from the Romans, the Greeks, and the Egyptians. Instead, it rose from the Persian Empire. It's a fascinating book, but it also has 636 pages in tiny print, which is why I've earmarked all of December for it, because it's a long and winding story. It's likely that the text on your About Us page isn't like the Silk Roads. It's not big and long and detailed, but it's easy to get carried away and tell the entire story. Instead, how about writing a bit of a memoir? The difference between a memoir and a history book is the point at which the story begins. Let's say we're writing a story about David Attenborough. We could start from his childhood and then we could bring in the facts that he loved to collect fossils. Or maybe we could fast forward to a pivotal moment like when David Attenborough was the controller of BBC Two. One day, suddenly the British government gave him the green light to introduce colour TV. And Attenborough talks about how, in a childish sort of way, his words, not mine, he said he wanted to be the first in Europe. That was a really small slice of the story, and what we've heard is just that, a memoir, a slice of the story. That tiny slice is what you'd call the basis of a memoir. Instead of a chronological start from babyhood and then into teenage life and then, just how things are written, instead we jump smack in the middle of a dramatic moment. And we continue that story from that point onwards without any drag. The Attenborough story talks about how he had incredibly tight time frame, how the Germans were close to launching around the very same time period, how he couldn't possibly go from all black and white to all color just in those 9 months, and how he solved the problem by taking on something that would have all the drama, the pomp, and yes, the color. So he decided at that point in time that he was going to broadcast Wimbledon. It was going to be his big color TV moment. I was as proud as a peacock, he says. It was an absolutely terrific moment, a big moment in my life. And you too can be very proud of your About Us page if it's got that drama. Instead of simply scrolling back in time and rolling out the dozens of events, go to the precise moment, one precise moment, and tell that one story. Make it a mini memoir instead of a very tedious historical record. So we have had 2 very quick fixes here. We've changed that photograph. We've also jumped right in the middle of some drama, told that story, just a few bullet points, then fleshed out those bullet points, got a mini memoir sort of thing going. And that takes us to the third fix. And this is what you're putting in there. Seems like it's about you, but it's about the client. You're getting the client to read between the lines. Let's find out how it's done. Let's dart back to that Attenborough story, shall we? What were the points in that story? Point one was an incredibly tight time frame. The second was that the Germans were very close to launching their own color TV version, and he had to do it as well. The third thing is that he had to go from all of it being black and white to suddenly switching to all color. Then the fourth point, he talks about how he solved that problem by piecemeal introduction of color, using Wimbledon as a showcase. If you removed Attenborough from the story and replaced it with someone else's name, you'd still get the characteristics to read as nimble, he was quick, he was good with facing great odds, inventive, rose to the challenge, and usually what's happening is there is this in-between text that as you're reading, you're getting a feeling of what's happening, the drama, but also the characteristics of the person or the company. When we look at the Psychotactics About Us page, there is a similar sort of approach. So the text is broken up into three parts when you go to the Psychotactics site. And the first part talks about how I got into an advertising agency and why the founder of the agency, Leo Burnett, had such an impact on me. The first section briefly mentions how I made the transition from copywriting to cartoons and then moved to marketing. When you move to the second section, it's all about teaching and how my parents and my grandma was a teacher. Moving to the final section, you're told that I wake up at 4 a.m. and that if you were to send me an email, you're likely to get an instant response. Did you manage to read between the lines? Background in advertising with a well-known agency, cartooning, marketing. What does that say? Lots of experience. The story of the heritage of teaching in my family. That kind of tells you, oh, maybe he is a good teacher, maybe. And then you go, I wake up at 4 a.m. and how I'm at my desk and very approachable on email. So that's what it's telling you. It tells you this person has a good work ethic and is approachable. Now, Attenborough's story is a memoir, and the Psychotactics page isn't a long history either. They're just two methods in which to attack the About Us page, because no matter which one you choose, it creates an underlying message. It's not just a set of words that simply talk about huge chunks of your life, but instead it gives you a short, intense piece of information, or rather pieces of information. The About Us page is often the hardest page to write, and that is because we aren't sure how we are supposed to talk about ourselves or what we need to say. Often we ramble on for no good reason. However, if you were to pick on a memoir, or maybe even a mini memoir, that's a brief and pertinent section of your life. Now what you're doing is you're bringing in the drama, you're bringing in all of that excitement into that one piece. And that is a really good start. And when you read back, can you read between your own lines? Can you audit it? Can you see what's happening? What is that memoir really telling about you? Then you've taken the next step. So what we have here are, well, three ways, but really two different ways to tell your story and one visual way to do it, which is the photograph. And what happens is that a landscape photograph, instead of that tight, cropped studio photograph that you put on your passport, your driving license, and all other official documents. And these are just three little tweaks that you can make. The photo, the mini memoir, and the little audit of reading between the lines. Where will you start first? I'd say a good start is to have that mini memoir. To find a dramatic story in your life where you had this specific problem and then you overcame it. And keep that problem slightly different from all the stuff that you read out there. You will have that problem. All of us have problems that we overcome, but when you tell that story briefly, then you're kind of giving the reader an understanding of who you are. And that's the most crucial part about the About Us page. It's like a date. People want to know very quickly who you are and how they can trust you and why they should trust you. So do that. Find a little story from your life, see if you can write it, and start there. That's a good start. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. If you've been on the Psychotactics list for a while, you'll notice something very strange, that a lot of the courses and the books, they all seem to sell out extremely quickly. They don't take weeks like most people do. There are no Facebook ads. There's nothing. And we work with a very small list. Even though we've been around for almost 20 years now, we work with a very small list. Yet, all of that gets sold very quickly. And the reason for that is the concept of pre-sale. Now, if you've been paying attention to the podcast, then there have been several podcasts on pre-sale. So go and listen to that to begin with, because you'll understand how some of that pre-sale has been done. But you can also get goodies at psychotactics.com/PRE goodies. That's pre-goodies. And when you do that, you can get the goodies, but it also gets you on the waiting list for the pre-sale course. Now, this pre-sale course is a self-study course. You have to download it and go through it yourself. But it will give you that framework, even if you don't have a product, or even if you're thinking of launching your first product. Because most of us are at that stage where we have something, we have an idea, but then we don't know how we're going to sell it. And this is what the book does. I think you'll find it very useful. Go to psychotactics.com/pre-goodies, and that's how you'll get it. There are only 25 copies. Now, I forgot to give you the date, but it's the 22nd of November. And if you get there by the 22nd of November, you'll get a notification, and then and only then can you purchase the course. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now. And we'll see you in 5000 BC. That's the membership site where you have to be kind, be helpful, or be gone. Bye-bye. Still listening? One of the things that people ask me on a recurring basis is the About Us page that interesting, that powerful? And I run them through a test. I say, okay, so tell me, what time do I wake up every day? And they have to write it down. And then I say, at workshops, what color is my shirt? And then they have to write it down. And just with these two questions, I could ask them more questions, of course, but with just these two questions, they're able to answer that I'm up at 4 a.m. They're able to answer that the shirt is blue in color. Now, this is not anywhere else on the site but the About Us page. You might think, well, what's that got to do with anything? But this is what branding is about. People are reading stuff, they're looking at stuff, they're taking in these messages, and that's why the About Us page becomes so critical. So fixing your About Us page is a really good thing, and just making it readable, not this endless history, this historical record of 636 pages like the Silk Roads. Having said that, I'm really looking forward to reading the Silk Roads. I've got somewhere along the way, but it's a long and winding road. That's me, Sean D'Souza, saying bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.